Welcome to the other 167. I'm Brandon. We had started the series Is Dating Holy? Just a very quick recap. We spoke about the dangers of meeting a person alone. That dating was never ordained by God. It's a crutch, it's a tool or an excuse for people to get intimate, to be physical with no commitment for life. It's a place where people find refuge and a temporary escape from reality and all of that. And how that meeting someone alone, and I'm talking about Christians who want to date, I'm talking about that complacency where you exchange numbers with someone random and then you want to go and meet them physically, maybe over a cup of coffee or something. I'm talking about these things, that these things were never ordained by God, and if you really want to marry, there's a way to be married God's way. So we will talk about that in the videos to follow. Now, is dating holy part 2? The danger of getting physical through dating. Now remember, certainly I'm not necessarily talking about booking a hotel and planning sex, though this is going too far to your own destruction. But even the sheer act of hugging and kissing or holding of hands on a date have got grievous consequences. Remember, as believers in Christ, it is God who works it out for two people that He wants together. In a world that normalizes sex, dating, and fun for pleasure to come through as competitive, it's almost all the time that even as believers, we are tempted to date or get it on with the person that's often outside of God's will. If presented with an opportunity, we won't even mind going out with an unbeliever just to find some kind of refuge or fill the void. These are the fruits of dating. The freedom to meet on dates as often as one wishes makes room for needs and desires that will prove fatal in the end, especially when God brings an end to that ungodly relationship. Okay, so what happens is when you find all the freedom in the world to go out with that person, your mind will always work in an ungodly way. Dating brings two sinners together. Remember, when you go on dates, you're not going out with an angel. You're not going out with someone, even if she's a Christian, even if she claims to be a believer or he claims to be a believer. Remember that two people with infirmities are coming together in an ungodly way. It was never ordained by God to bring two people randomly like that over a cup of coffee and talk. Because no matter how Christian the other person is or how Christian they claim to be, the enemy is crafty. And when you have that freedom of being alone with that person, inadvertently you always will feel that that person somehow is yours already. Because that situation of going out for a coffee or that situation of going out over coffee will give you that facsimile or that image that somehow you're already inside of the covenant of marriage, and that is destructive to your soul. Even the sheer act of rubbing shoulders or holding of hands or probably leaning on someone's shoulder, say you went for a movie, probably one of you slept off or felt tired and then you were leaning on the person's shoulder, there's a lot of information that's being exchanged. Now that person may not be for you. Now you may try and console yourself that, I didn't touch that person sexually, I didn't touch that person's breast, or maybe I didn't go for that person's private part, but I was just leaning on that person, and I think that's fine. Now remember, when you do all these things and God has not orchestrated that relationship or that covenant or that person for you for marriage, you're going to have grievous consequences. That one date is going to haunt you for over months together or even years. Okay, so be very mindful of your actions. Now what happens is when you sleep with someone, you slept with a person outside of God's will, yet now you can't let go of them. You can't forget the one whose continuity in your life is baseless and unfruitful. You're spiritually bound with them through a soul tie. You're unable to move ahead in life because dating that appears normal made too much room for someone who was never meant to do life with you. So just because society normalized dating, you're now in a rut. You're now in big trouble. You got physical with a person, it's hard to forget that person. On getting physical, you now feel the obligation and duty to hold on to that person, even though they are outside of God's agenda. You feel you have betrayed them when you must walk out of the relationship and obey God. How many times when we got into ungodly relationships and we realized they were ungodly later, not during that phase, you felt that you were betraying that person because you could not agree, or you could not move, or you could not go ahead with that person. You feel you're betraying them. You feel you're being harsh to them because you have to walk out. And that's the hardest part, by the way, because that was the hardest for me as well several years ago. And when you have to obey God, that's the hardest part. And I encourage you to obey God and to do what is good for you, to do what is right in God's eyes for you. If you are doing something which is right in God's eyes, you have not to worry what the other person will feel, or in what way they will react, or if it leads them to sorrow and they are crying about it. You don't have to break your head about that. You do have to give them clarity. You do have to walk out when you must walk out, but do not beat yourself up for it because you had to walk out, or you should walk out because you're obeying God. I would end this with a Bible verse, 1 Corinthians chapter 7:2. It says, "Now concerning the things you wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband." So you see, to avoid fornication, which is basically dating, to avoid fornication, to avoid taking up things after your own mind and your own strength, it is better to get married God's way. I'll address things, and probably that will make things more clearer. So I'm glad that you're part of the series. I'm glad you're part of this ministry. God bless you, and have a good week.